So welcome to everyone for joining us at the webinar today. We'll give it a few more minutes to let participants join our event, and then we'll get started in a minute or two. Great. It looks like we have a critical mass of people who have joined us. So thanks to everyone who's joined the webinar today. This is a chance for everyone to find out a little bit more about the U.S. Academic Alliance for the IPCC, which is a new alliance that has just formed in the past month to help increase participation by U.S. scientists in the IPCC processes, and in particular to help with nominations for the 7th assessment report cycle, which has just opened. So we will be presenting information about both the Alliance and the work of the IPCC, and talking about how folks can get involved in these processes. So next slide, please. So our panelists today are myself. I'm Pam McWee. I'm at Rutgers University, where I'm a professor of human ecology. I'm also joined today by Beth Martin, who's at Washington University in St. Louis, Jesse O'Reilly, who's at Indiana University, Michael Oppenheimer, who's at Princeton University, and the four of us are members of academic institutions that are part of the Alliance, and are going to be part of the process of helping to nominate scientists. And we're also really thankful to have the support of AGU, which is hosting the Alliance. And today we have Mark Shimamoto and Razmila Razak from AGU who are joining us. So next slide, please. So just to give an overview of what we're going to be doing today in the webinar, I'm going to be giving a brief introduction to what the U.S. Academic Alliance is and what we're hoping to achieve. And then Beth, Jesse, and Michael will be talking about the IPCC and the particular roles of different experts within that process. And then we'll talk about the practicalities of the portal that AGU has set up to accept nominations for the Alliance, what that looks like, what you'll need for that. And then hopefully we'll have the last half an hour of the webinar for questions and discussions. So please, if you have questions along the way, you can put them in Q&A. But we will have plenty of time at the end of the webinar to be able to hear from folks. So next slide, please. So a little bit about our alliance. So as I mentioned, we have just formed this month, and we are an alliance that is essentially a network of U.S. universities and colleges. And our 10 institutions, what we have in common is that we are all registered observers with the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So we are the only 10 U.S. academic institutions that are granted observer status. So this gives us the particular right to nominate experts to IPCC process. It also gives us the right to attend as observers to the plenaries of IPCC. And so leveraging that role that we have formed this network to try to enhance opportunities for other folks to engage with IPCC. So our network is hosted, as I said, by the American Geophysical Union. We're very grateful that they have set up a wonderful portal for us to explain what it is that we are going to be doing through this nominations process. And so we very much appreciate their support. So the members, as I mentioned, we have 10 folks in the Academic Alliance, and so they are all founding members. And our members include Colby College, College of the Atlantic, Dickinson College, Indiana University, Princeton University, Rutgers University, the University of California at San Diego, Washington University in St. Louis, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, and Yale University. So we have a steering committee. So next slide, please. We have a steering committee for this new alliance, and it's composed of folks who represent those 10 institutions. I was happy to take on the role of chairing this to kind of move us along. And so you can see the names of the folks of each of our 10 institutions that are part of the steering committee, along with Mark Shimamoto, who's at AGU. So all of us are open to any questions, particularly if you are at these institutions. These are key points of contact. So several of the people on the steering committee serve as the actual focal points for their institution. That is, they are the main node by which nominations get passed to IPCC. Some of us, like myself, I'm not the actual focal point for Rutgers, but I have been a lead author in the past for IPCC. And so I'm playing this role to expand access to IPCC processes for other folks as well. So next slide, please. So the purpose, why have we set up this alliance? It is mainly because we want to make sure that US scientists are being nominated, particularly because we now have an open call for experts for the current 7th assessment cycle for IPCC. So our overarching goal is to increase awareness of these authorship calls to make sure they're going out to our wider scientific and scholarly community, making sure that people are aware of them and knowing about how people can be involved, like what the process to actually be nominated is. And if you are an expert who is interested in being nominated to IPCC in one of multiple roles, it's important to know that you could be nominated by multiple organizations. So there is no worry or concern about maybe your nomination going in twice. And so we are taking advantage of that. Traditionally, it has been the US government that has nominated many US scientists. We have formed this alliance to ensure that nominations go forward from US scientists should the US government process be in any way changed or different than previous processes. We don't know that it will be, but we do know that the US government process has not opened yet. Traditionally, it opens pretty quickly after the IPCC opens their call. And so we wanted to increase confidence that scientists will know that there is a way for them to get nominated. So we are offering this as a service to US scientists. So we really encourage, though, that whatever formal US government process may eventually open, that US-based scientists also apply through that process. So essentially send your nomination in twice. It's really to guarantee that you have multiple channels. So we'll return to this if there's questions about that. But again, we want this to be in addition to any government process that may eventually open. So because the US government has traditionally managed this process and often has provided the funding for scientists to go be attending lead author meetings for those that are selected, we want to highlight that our alliance is working to facilitate access to the nomination process, but we currently do not have the ability to provide travel and subsistence funding. So if we get to the point where we may need to revisit this for authors that have been selected, certainly the Alliance will try to help as best we can, but we are not committed to being able to provide travel at this point for anybody that is selected. So again, that's why it's important that people also send their nomination forms through any sort of US government process in case the US government, as we hope, continues as it normally does, and we'll be able to provide funding for those US scientists that are selected. So next slide, please. So right now the portal is open at AGU. This is a screenshot of what it will look like when you open up the website. So you can see the URL here is AGU and then IPCC nominations. We will talk a little bit more about what you will need once you get to this landing page and the forms that you need to upload. But just to say the portal is open, it is ready. We already have a number of folks that have submitted complete nomination packages already, and we thank people for having done that so quickly. Really appreciate it. So next slide, please. So I'm going to turn over at this point to Michael Oppenheimer, who's going to take over and tell us a bit more about the role of the IPCC and why it's so important for US scientists to be involved.
Thank you, Pam. The IPCC was created with the objective of presenting regular scientific assessments on climate change to governments. And it has been very effective on that role. In some sense, it almost has a monopoly on providing such information. And it has, as a result, prevented scientific conflict from invading the negotiations that go on climate change by and large. and therefore has played a key role in making sure that the negotiations focus on what they're supposed to focus on. The projections and the assessments and projections focus on current climate and also future climate and what the intended risks are that accompany climate change. You take it back.
Great, thanks, Michael.
Over to
Yeah, next
Jesse.
slide. Yep, and Jesse.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you all here. Looking back at what happened with the last assessment report cycle, AR6, it was a highly ambitious, really high workload assessment report cycle. There were multiple special reports, 3 special reports, a methodology report, then the classic 3 working group reports, and then the entire process was capped by a synthesis report. It was a pretty heavy lift, particularly with the number of special reports. It was the highest number of special reports ever seen in an assessment report cycle. And then it was also disrupted by the coronavirus pandemic. At the same time, AR6 reports were highly impactful, particularly the special report on 1.5 degrees Celsius was the most cited IPCC report. Those of us who attend UNFCCC meetings as well were able to see how impactful IPCC reports were in policy decisions there and elsewhere. Next slide, please. When IPCC leaders were thinking about the workload for AR7, they considered multiple models and discussed these with the panel governments, and ultimately decided to have only one special report. This special report on climate change in cities is already underway. The nomination process is over, and the assessment has begun. They've had their first lead author meeting. There will be a methodology report on short-lived climate forcers, and there will be the classic 3 working groups. The first on physical science, second on impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability, and the third working group on mitigation. Like always, there will be a synthesis report. That one doesn't nominate authors. The authors for the synthesis report are selected from authors from the previous reports from that cycle. Next slide, and back to Michael.
So I'm going to go over the particulars of the roles that people will be nominated for. And I want to add one that's not on this slide that is not a matter of the current nominations, but you should keep it in mind. That's the contributing author role. And the reason you should keep it in mind, it involves a lesser commitment of time, lesser focus on the production of the report, but allows individuals who don't want to be involved at the level that the other authors are a way to contribute. The highest level of involvement is called coordinating lead author. And by the way, I've served in all of these positions since the first assessment. And I've had different experiences in each. Being a coordinating lead author is a complicated job because it goes well beyond just sort of knowing the science and managing the contribution of science to the report. It involves being able to manage people and being willing to manage people. And that can be a complicated job when you're dealing with a bunch of experts who have their own strong views, not just about the science, but about what role they should play. And it's basically the coordinating lead author's job to make sure the final product, which is a chapter of the report, of the individual working group report, gets delivered on time in a way that is not just readable to scientists and other experts, but is understandable by people in government, some of whom themselves are scientists, who need to know the details. So that's the hardest job. It takes them a major commitment of time over a period of 3 years, and nobody should ask to be nominated for it lightly. It's really a heavy lift. The second and more common role is called lead author. Lead authors have knowledge which could be rather narrowly focused on a particular aspect of a sub-aspect of a particular aspect of climate change. Let's say, the future of sea ice in a chapter that's dealing with sea level rise and the cryosphere and maybe a number of other issues at the same time. And the amount of involvement that person has can be quite substantial and can take up a fair amount of your time over the course of the 3 years or so that the report is written and reviewed. But you have a fair amount of control over the way you spend your time. You can sort of self-define your role once you see what others who have been have gotten the author role, how they view their roles. And it's a negotiation among the authors of each chapter about who's going to do what. And therefore, there's room for people to be a little flexible in how much responsibility they want to take up. But it's the lead authors who are the core, the very core and determine ultimately whether the chapter has the substance that it needs to have for policymakers to make the decisions based on it that they need to make. The third role is sort of unique. They're called review editors. There's generally 2, maybe sometimes 3 for each chapter, and they have a very intensive but episodic involvement in the report. And they are the ones who are sort of the interface between the outside reviewers of the report, who have substantial sway over its ultimate content, just as peer reviewers generally do in the literature, by commenting on the initial drafts and then the interim the drafts as we march towards the final drafts that the governments get. And this role is important because it's the quality guarantee. If the lead authors, aren't being responsible in their responses to the reviewers, then the review editor is the person who must call them to task. And ultimately, the review editor has the power to hold up a chapter and force it to go through a process of reconsideration by both the authors and the higher ups at IPCC to make sure that the reviews have been responded to. And the review editor role was not in IPCC at its inception, but grew out of some disputes that arose around 2009 about some misjudgments IPCC made in the handling of some particular issues on the one hand, and some attacks on IPCC, some unjustified attacks that came from the outside. And it was suggested by something called what's now called the Inter-Academy Partnership, a group of national academies of science. So that role is, in a sense, leaves you the most flexibility. And on the other hand, when the job needs to be done, it really needs to be done. And there's a lot of work to be done over a relatively short period of several weeks. Beyond that, as I said, if none of that is appealing, but you still want to be involved, you wait until the authors of the chapters have been picked and you contact the coordinating lead authors of any chapter where you'd like to volunteer as a contributing author. And of course, it goes without saying that all of these categories are only occupied by people who have the proper expertise for the subject that the chapter is covering. There's another nomination process which is running parallel. That's for experts to the IPCC Task Force on Data Support for Climate Change Assessments, and we'll be accepting, that is, the Alliance will be accepting nominations and submitting nominations to IPCC for people who want to be involved in that process. Final and most important thing I can say is that the U.S. Academic Alliance is going to accept nominations up until April 4. That's short of when the IPCC allows us to upload nominations, but we need time to take a look at the applications, make sure they're complete, and make sure that there's at least some level of expertise on the part of the person who's being nominated. Over back to Jesse, I think.
Great. Thank you, Michael. I'm going to turn over to Beth at this point. Beth Martin.
Thanks, Pam. So I'm going to go quickly over the next couple of slides. This just highlights the press release that the IPCC put out about the call for the authors for the 7th assessment report. Then next slide. Here we have an outline, the agreed upon outline at the most recent panel meeting. Governments agreed upon this outline for working group 1. And we're just going to go through the next 2 slides quickly. It also includes the outline for working group 2 and the outline for working group 3. These will be important as you're considering your application, because there will be questions as to which chapter you're interested in engaging with. So go ahead to the next one as well. So with this slide, I'm trying to help a little bit understand the process of nomination. There was a question in the chat about self-nomination. So you're not able to self-nominate. So the way I like to think about it is we're trying to put names in the bucket of potential coordinating lead authors, and review editors. And in order to get your name in the bucket for consideration by the Bureau, a government, an admitted observer organization, or a Bureau member has to actually put your name in that bucket. And so that's what we're trying to do with our group. We're all admitted observer organizations, so we have that ability to put names in the bucket. Just in case anyone here is curious or is from a different country, every government has their own process for how they might decide of how to put a name in the bucket. And to my knowledge, that there is no kind of written record of what individual governments' processes are, but each government has a different and their own unique process for how to put names in the bucket. So once the names go into the bucket of nominees, then those nominees are reviewed by the Bureau. And those are the leads for each of the different working groups will evaluate and review all of the names in the bucket, and they will select the authors. I did want to highlight that there was a question too about younger scientists, and then someone else asked a question about, I'm not an academic institution, I'm with the city government. Can I still, put my name forward to be put in that bucket? And the answer to that is yes. The IPCC has been making an effort to include wide range of expertise in its authorship, including a balance in younger scientists who are new to the process, as well as older who are more familiar with the process. And they also are taking into account a balance in gender, and also looking into other types of knowledge other than traditional, what we might consider traditional academic knowledge, in terms of practitioner knowledge and indigenous knowledge as well. So all of those can be put kind of in that nominee bucket to be reviewed by the Bureau. And then the Bureau is the one that ultimately does the selection of authors. Go ahead to the next slide. So this is a diagram put forth by the IPCC that highlights the process of generation of a report. And so where we are in this process, the scoping meeting for each of these working group reports happened in December. Then the experts that participated in the scoping meeting put forth an outline. Those outlines were discussed and agreed upon at the most recent panel meeting in Hangzhou, China. So now we're at that stage at the eyeglasses up on the top right for nomination of authors. And so that's where we are. I wanted to highlight another opportunity for engagement. So as you scroll down, you'll see in the middle, that first blue dock is the expert review first order draft. So even if someone is not selected to be an author, there's an opportunity for engagement at that point in the process by providing feedback on that first order draft that comes out for review. So there's the opportunity to engage there, and then there's also an opportunity to engage at the second order draft, which comes a little bit further down the line. Okay, go on to the next slide. And I believe I'm turning it back over to Pam.
Great, thank you. So I've been answering a few questions in the chat that I think are around these eligibility questions. So what we intend to do for the U.S. Academic Alliance is to offer this nomination process to people who are either U.S. citizens or based at U.S. institutions. So there may be U.S. citizens that are based abroad that would like to go through our process. There may be folks who maybe are not U.S. citizens, but they are based at a U.S. university, and they may feel that their citizenship from another country doesn't afford them an active chance to participate because their focal point maybe from that country doesn't nominate very many people. So we're opening it up to either U.S. citizens or based at U.S. institutions. And so what's going to happen is once you go through the AGU portal and we have all of the nomination material, the 10 institutions that are part of the Alliance are going to essentially divvy up those nomination forms. And so you won't know which of us necessarily is going to end up nominating you if you have met all the eligibility requirements, but we will be sharing that load. So, it takes a while to upload all of these. We want to make sure that they all get in. So each institution is going to take a chunk of them to upload. So we also, again, encourage you to submit, particularly if you are a U.S. citizen, through the U.S. government process as well. And this email here is the IPCC focal point at the State Department. And so that is the node by which U.S. government has traditionally run this process. So please also send your package, and I'll tell you what a package is in just a minute, your CV and a particular Excel form that we need from you. So please, when you send it to us, also send it to the U.S. focal point. Again, we hope that their process may open up. We hope there may be some announcements about it, but we have not seen it and we don't know anything about it. I would also add that there are other organizations that are observers to IPCC. For example, a number of U.S. NGOs have observer status to IPCC. And we would urge you that if you work for an NGO or one of these other organizations that does have observer status, please go through your focal point, the person who is in your organization. That'll lessen the load on us. We want to be providing nominations for people who don't have any other way to get their nominations through. So if you are working for one of these other observer organizations, please go through your own focal point. Again, just to kind of make sure that we're not overloaded with too many folks. So if you are not a U.S. citizen or you're not based at a U.S. institution, you should apply through a focal point at the government that is the basis of your citizenship. And you can find all of those focal points at this link on the IPCC website. And so all governments that are members of IPCC will have a focal point identified, and you'll be able to contact them directly. And that's the way to do it if you are not based at a U.S. institution or not a U.S. citizen. So next slide, please. So the needed information that you're going to need to have in hand to submit through the AGU portal is going to be some personal information, your name, address, email, contact information. You're going to need a filled in Excel form for each working group that you are applying for. So remember, there's multiple working groups and you need to indicate for each working group that you're interested in, which chapters you're interested in being considered for. So if you want to be considered for both working group 1 and working group 2, you need to fill out 2 Excel forms. These Excel forms are available on the portal. So when you get to the point where you're looking at the AGU site and you're seeing where you want to do the nomination, you'll be able to access those Excel sheets. You have to download them, fill them out, and then re-upload them again. They have to be filled out correctly. The IPCC portal that the nominating institutions will send them to, will reject them if they are not filled out properly. So the onus is really on everyone to make sure every cell is filled out of these Excel forms. You also need to have a CV in hand, and that needs to be no more than 4 pages and no larger than 2 megabytes. So again, it will get rejected if it doesn't follow those parameters. So please make sure you're following directions. So all nominations that are coming in through our portal need to be complete and they need to be received by midnight Eastern time on April 4th. So that's end of next week. So please pay attention to that deadline because we want to make sure that we get folks nominated. So next slide, please. So this is what the Excel sheet looks like that you will be able to download from our site. You can also download it from the IPCC site, but you're going to have to fill this out. It talks about your expertise. It has your information, your personal information, and then you indicate which chapters you want to be considered for, and you list 3 most relevant publications. So again, fill this out in its entirety, and then you'll re-upload it up for us to have. So next slide, please. And I think I'm going to turn over to Mark at this point.
Great. Thank you, Pam. And I just wanted to say AGU is very pleased to support this nomination process through the U.S. Academic Alliance. AGU is a leading publisher that's often heavily cited across IPCC reports, and our members, both domestically and internationally, are heavily engaged in the IPCC process, either as contributors or experts. So it was an easy yes for us to step into this role, and we're pleased to host and facilitate the nomination process. With that, I'm going to briefly demo the portal for some of the folks who may not have checked out the website yet. And some of you may be familiar with this website as well if you participated through past AGU honors processes as well. So when you go to the page, you'll see the first option to either log in. If you're an AGU account holder already, you can log in through your AGU account, or you can submit and start the nomination process without starting an account. And then from there, you'll be asked kind of a high-level question based on some of the early criteria that the Alliance has shared with you all to help to assess if you're at a U.S. academic institution or a U.S. institution overall, or a U.S. citizen participating at an institution abroad. Then from there, you will see the full, next slide. You'll see the full form that is helping us on the Alliance side capture the baseline information to start to manage the assessment process to upload nomination documents to the IPCC Bureau. You'll see here just high-level information, name, institution, and email. And then when you get a little bit further down, you can select which working groups you're interested in nominating against. And each time you click on one of the working groups, the IPCC Bureau template Excel spreadsheet will show up. You can download it. You can fill that out offline. And then once completed, and as Pam said, fully completed, you can then upload it to this form directly. And then once you've completed your individual Excel spreadsheets, depending on which group you're applying to, we'll also ask that you upload a PDF version of a max 4-page CV that does not exceed 2 megabytes. That will then be the last step in securing your information, and then you will go to the final stage, which is next slide, which you kind of accept the role and acknowledge what the U.S. Academic Alliance for IPCC is hoping to do. Forwarding a nomination by the observer groups does not constitute an endorsement of a candidate. All completed and submitted IPCC nominations through the U.S. Academic Alliance is at the decision process of the IPCC Bureau. As Pam noted, if the forms or the Excel spreadsheets aren't completed fully, the Bureau website will deny that. Unfortunately, we will do our best to help to reach out if we have enough time to those nominators to make adjustments if needed. And then moving forward, author selections for the IPCC by the Bureau is likely to happen sometime later this year around September. So with that, I will hand it back to Pam, and I think we can open up for questions.
Yeah, so now we've been trying to answer some of the questions that are showing up in the Q&A and in the chat as well. And so I think there's a couple that we have agreed to already answer live, and then we'll open up and see if there are others that people want to additionally ask. So there was a question about funding sources, that we don't have funding to send authors on travel. Traditionally in the past, U.S. experts have usually constituted around 25 to 30 people per working group report. And so when you add up the travel for that number of people, it's pretty substantial. And so it's something that the US government has covered in the past. Certainly, we will try to think if we get the understanding of how many authors have been selected for the reports. We would like to hopefully suggest that for each author, they work with their institution first. It's going to be hard times, we all know, for climate science moving forward, and we hope some institutions will be able to step up and fill the gap if we have it here for this. We also have talked within the Alliance of trying to do some fundraising ourselves, and we have some potential places that we're going to try to go for that. We will see if we are able to do that, but people should be aware that this may be a leaner year than has been in the past, where travel was covered by US government sources. So we'll try to be flexible. We'll try to be as helpful as we can, but we can't guarantee anything at this point. But we certainly want people to, if you're at an institution that's able to help you out with travel, that would be great. And in fact, that's what people in other countries have often had to do. A lot of the authors are from countries that don't provide travel and are not supported financially by the IPCC, in which case those authors will sometimes dip into their own grant funds or find other sources. So our US authors may be in that situation this time, but we'll see. I think there was one, Jesse, that you were going to answer live.
I just meant to type it, but I accidentally said I'd answer it live. If you, and I saw there was a question about contributing authors as well. If you are interested in a particular chapter but aren't selected as a CLA, LA, or a review editor, you can reach out to the CLAs. Once those author lists are published, they're live. And you can let them know that you're available as a contributing author with your expertise on X. And also, I encouraged early career people or people near the end of their PhD to contact chapters within your expertise about the role of chapter scientists who help organize and do a lot of amazing coordination work for getting these chapters to the finish line.
Great, thanks. There's also a question, there's a couple of questions, folks who want to know more about this contributing author role. So Jesse just alluded to that. I don't know if anybody else wants to say anything more about contributing authors. Yeah.
Can I just, oh, go ahead.
No, I could just say that they're extremely useful for filling gaps of expertise that exist between the various lead authors. And some chapters have way more contributing authors than they have lead authors. So they play a critical role, but it's a very narrow and well-defined role, so it doesn't take a huge amount of time. So for someone who has something that they think is lacking, particularly if once they look at the list of lead authors, if they see a gap, they could just approach either one or more of the lead authors or the coordinating lead authors of the chapter. There are usually 2, sometimes 3, and suggest themselves. It's a self-voluntary process, or they'll reach out, or the chapter may reach out to you.
Great. Yeah, these are really crucial for filling gaps. But as Michael was saying, we often don't know that we have gaps until we're some ways into the process. So even after the author teams are constituted, which we think is going to happen later this year, they may be working, maybe after the first order draft where a gap is identified. So just because you haven't heard something or you made contact and didn't hear anything initially, it may be that a gap does emerge in the process of assessing the literature. So people can be brought on at later stages as well. So I see a question about multiple roles for one chapter. That would be fine. You are allowed to say that you'd be willing to be either a CLA or an LA or a review editor for multiple chapters. So you just need to indicate, based on what you've heard, which roles you're willing to play. And it may be all of them. So you'll need to indicate that. That'll be part of the Excel spreadsheet that will be uploaded by you once you fill it out as part of the nomination process. Let's see if there's other questions here.
Yeah, I see one
Yeah.
that came across Pam while you were talking. So Michael, I think you might be well suited for this. The question of, if you are selected as a coordinating lead author, how many international meetings is that committing you to? And then there was a second similar question in the Q&A about the potential of virtual engagement. So how many meetings, and are they all in person, or is there an opportunity for virtual engagement, was the question.
Well, I last was a coordinating lead author or a lead author before the COVID year, just before COVID. So I can't really, things may have changed, and maybe Jesse, who's been around more in the recent couple of years, could indicate the answer to that. But in general, um, I'm sorry, I lost the thread on the first part of the question, which was.
Well, the first part was, so let's talk about historically, like pre-COVID, how many international meetings
Oh, yeah.
would
So
you be committing yourself to in these
yeah,
roles?
so I think it was at minimum 4 lead author meetings. But then once you get involved, there's always a chance of being asked to serve on the synthesis report, which could involve another 3 or 4 meetings. So if you like it and you don't mind the international travel, this can occupy quite a bit of your life for a period of 4 years, let's say. And, I've done the whole thing more than once, and it's an interesting way to spend your professional life, but you have to realize it's going to take half your time, I'd say, if
Yeah.
you're a coordinating lead author.
Yeah, these are not roles to be taken lightly. Yeah, it really depends on the volunteer efforts, of which it can be quite time consuming. Yeah. Jesse.
Yeah, I just want to say to the early career people who are on here, if you are interested in being an LA or a CLA and you get that invitation, make sure you speak to some mentors who have done this role before, because it can really overtake a lot of your research time. So just something to consider. It's a very worthy activity, but it is, I think even the LAs who I interviewed from AR6 were a little shocked by the time commitment. So I wanted to point that out. And my understanding is that they do plan to have 4 in-person lead author meetings as usual this time, and some online work in between. And if I understand correctly, they're planning the first lead author meeting to be all 3 working groups together this fall, which is really interesting.
Great. So I see a question about how competitive these roles are, how many nominations come in for the roles. They are quite competitive. There are people all over the world that are interested in being part of these reports. So just to give a sort of sense just of the US nominations process, we were looking at one of the special reports that'll be part of this AR7 cycle, and that's the special report on cities. And there were somewhere in the order of 240, 250 people nominated from the US for that report. And somewhere on the order of around 20 or 25 were selected. So we're looking about, maybe 10% or lower. So it depends on how many people are nominated. That we don't know what the total pool is going to be, but it is a very competitive selection process. So just because your nomination has been forwarded by our alliance is no guarantee that you're going to be selected by IPCC. So IPCC takes into account expertise in your area. They try to balance out in chapters across levels of experience, or younger scholars with people who are more experienced. They try to have some geographic balance in chapters. They try to have gender balance. There are a lot of considerations. So it's basically like putting a jigsaw puzzle together. And so there's no guarantee that you're going to fit what they're necessarily looking for, even if you do have a lot of experience in a particular topic. So the best thing you can do is, submit your nominations, be part of the process, and then if you are selected, be aware that it is very prestigious, and hopefully you'll enjoy and benefit from the process of being an author. So then there's another question about role of experience for the different roles. And as we were just saying, that they're looking for a range of experience, right? So just because you haven't worked on one of these reports before doesn't mean that you can't apply. You should. They are looking for people who haven't been on an assessment report before. It sort of brings fresh perspectives. So please, if you have, you should have some relevant expertise in climate. And part of that relevant expertise may be being a practitioner. So don't think about it just from the role of climate science or expertise in terms of academic expertise. But if you're working for city government, state government, you're working with organizations that are doing on-the-ground climate actions, IPCC is increasingly really interested in reflecting that practitioner expertise within author teams as well. So sort of bear that in mind, have a sort of broad idea of what expertise means. And, you know, like we said, go ahead and try, right? The worst thing that can happen is, you know, get selected, but you might be, you know, get on the radar for the next assessment cycle or something. So I think it's just, you never know unless you try. So hopefully
Can
we're
I add
encouraging
something
people.
to that? Also, if you're an NGO, or if you work in the private sector for a firm, that kind of participation is welcome. The IPCC likes to proceed with a sense of that people have views, but they're listening to all views. So don't be afraid to nominate or to ask to be nominated, no matter what your background is, as long as it's relevant.
Absolutely.
And I wanted to just tap into there was a question earlier, and that the process that we're doing is simply to facilitate, right? Facilitating getting names in the bucket. And what we're trying to model is how we understand that the US government has also done it in the past, where we're not trying to run our own screening process, right? We're not trying to put only certain names in the bucket. As long as people have basic levels of qualification and climate engagement, then we're going to move the names forward. We're not going to do any type of really strict screening process. We will be making sure that there is that people who put their names forward are engaged in the climate arena and are working in the climate space. But we're not going to be doing a heavy screen on names that we put forward. We fully intend to, if the basic work is there, we'll push the name forward. We don't see that as our role. That's the role of the Bureau to pick the best combination of CLAs and LAs.
So I see some points in the chat about people wanting the slides, including the outlines of the working group chapter outlines. The webinar itself is being recorded. That will be available afterwards. And I think, Mark, we should be able to at least share links to the working group outlines, maybe on the website as well. It sounds like that would be helpful for people. They're not finding it on our IPCC website.
Yeah, we can certainly do that and also upload the slides from this webinar.
So there's another question that, oh, I'm sorry, Jesse.
Yeah, I've been trying to find the newsletter links, and it looks like they were specific to AR6. So I would encourage you to follow IPCC on your favorite social media. And I put a link there with all of these different roles described, including reviewer, chapter scientist, that sort of thing. And all of their social media buttons are down at the bottom there. So I think that's the best way to stay informed about what IPCC is up to at this point.
So there's a question in the chat that says, will this USAA-IPCC nominations continue even if the federal process is resumed? And that answer is yes. The federal process is kind of like two levels. You can send your information to the focal point email that's there, and that exists just like it does for any country, right? Each government has their own IPCC focal point that manages that. But in the US, in addition to that, there's usually been a call that is done. And it's that call part that we have not seen and hasn't been initiated, but the US focal point for the IPCC still exists and is there, and that email goes to them. but we will be putting nominations forward regardless. And I think as Pam mentioned earlier, does not matter if your name is put into the bucket multiple times. That's absolutely fine.
Yeah. So our role is really trying to increase confidence that your nomination will get there to IPCC through our process if you're meeting these expertise and eligibility requirements that are set up. So there is a question in the chat as well about something about what our preference for application is. This is not our preference. This is IPCC requirements. You need to follow it strictly. The CV cannot be more than 4 pages. It cannot be more than 2 megabytes, and you have to fill out the Excel form in its entirety. Again, these are not USAA-IPCC requirements. This is for the IPCC itself. So we are passing these on. So if you exceed this in any way, the nomination is not going to go through. So really look at it carefully and make sure that you're clear that you're uploading the right things in the right format. And so if you have any questions about that formatting, again, the IPCC website has information about the author nomination process. You can double check it. But again, we're going to have to be strict because these will get rejected from us when we try to nominate them if they are not in the right formats.
Right. And by not go through, it doesn't mean that it gets into the bucket and somebody looks at it and says, oh, this is too long. It means that the actual system where you upload, you click upload, and it says, we're sorry, we can't accept your upload. So it won't even get put in the bucket. So just to be crystal clear, like that is a system issue, that a system requirement rather.
Timmons asked a question about the budget. IPCC's budget is approved through next year, but I don't know what's going on with the US budget. So I wasn't sure what you meant on that. And I can give you more information on that offline if you wish.
Wait, there's also a question about the scholarship program. So that is another call that's going on right now that IPCC is running. So the USAA-IPCC has not been involved in the scholarship call because that goes directly to IPCC. So please follow their processes for that. It's asking for letter of support from a focal point. My understanding is that needs to be the focal point from your home country. So we have not discussed providing letters from our own alliance just because we're not doing the scholarship thing. We're doing the nominations of experts. So if you have any questions about the scholarship program, I would direct it directly to IPCC. They should be able to send you to the right focal point to get that letter. And I'm trying to see, somebody's asked a question about 3 or 4 roles. There's 3 official roles that you can be nominated for. So it's coordinating lead author, and review editor for the assessment report. Those are the sort of author roles. There's also a 4th call for data exports for the task force on data. So those are the 4 things that are open right now. So the question is asking about contributing lead author. That's not a role. It's called contributing author. That is something that you don't get nominated for. It doesn't go through this formalized process. So a contributing author is someone that's either asked by a chapter later on to contribute a section of text, or you might contact folks that are working on a chapter because you've seen their names and say, hey, I'd be interested in helping out if I can. The difference is the coordinating lead author, the lead author, and the review editors go to the meetings. They have access to all of the online writing support. Contributing authors are not considered as internal to that process. So you wouldn't be going to author meetings. You wouldn't be having access to those IPCC writing systems and so forth. So it's less time. It's a bit more external. But then if you contribute writing that has been pulled into a chapter, you then get a credit as a contributing author when the final chapter comes out. So that's a little bit of a different role. It's not part of the nomination process. So you can't nominate yourself for that through our process. So have we answered all of the questions, I think? Yeah, Neil makes a good point. So Neil Leary, who's helping out in the chat, is one of our institutional representatives for USAA as well, and makes the important point that if you are interested in being a contributing author, it might make sense to go ahead and nominate yourself as a lead author. if you think you could also do that. But the advantage of that is it kind of gets your name in the hopper, right? You are then become a known entity as somebody who's interested in IPCC. So if a question does come up, hey, we've got an expertise gap, we might need to get a contributing author for chapter 8 here. Having your name, having gone through a nomination system is not a bad idea. And so if you think you have the capacity, because you might get selected as a lead author, so don't nominate yourself as a lead author if you don't actually have the capacity to do that. But it is another way to potentially get your name in front of people that are making decisions. So then there's a question on the chapter scientist role. So for graduate students and early career scientists in particular. So Jesse, I think you were talking about this earlier, about the chapter scientist role. So each chapter, essentially, it has 1 or 2 chapter scientists to help out.
Yes, and often they're like the CLAs, they're like students or former students of the CLAs, I think is the most common way to become a chapter scientist. But you can forward your CV and get in touch with CLAs once those are announced and say that you're interested in being a chapter scientist. Which is what most sort of early career researchers are at. The other, I mean, and anyone can be a reviewer. I just want to say anyone can be an expert reviewer. You do have to fill out a little form on IPCC's website. They're always looking and hoping for good reviews. And also another way to participate in IPCC is to publish your work and send your work to the chapter writing teams, or I've seen people put their citations in review comments. So get your work in front of the IPCC. That's a really important way. They can't assess the science without the science being in the literature.
Yep, really important point. Yeah, so there's really multiple avenues for engagement. We're certainly hoping that this nomination process for experts, that the alliance that we've put together will facilitate that, open that up, get more folks involved that maybe previously haven't thought about nominating themselves. We wish it were under better circumstances, but we're happy to be here. We're really enthusiastic, and we're hoping that maybe other institutions will apply to become observers with IPCC, and then you can join our alliance as well. So we started off with the 10 academic institutions that are now currently have observer status, and we'd love to grow that number. And so we see that as part of our role as well, as spreading the word about how important this is. That it really helps keep U.S. leadership in the IPCC, but it's also a benefit to our scientists. Like I have gone through this as an author. I recently co-chaired a different assessment, and the networks that we are able to draw on now from having been in these chapters and worked with scientists from around the world. It's made me a better scientist. It's made me consider new literatures and new directions that I might not have thought about before. And so that personal benefit from being part of this process is something that I hope we can share with all of you that may end up being selected. So are there any last questions here about... I see there's a question how to apply to be an observer organization. You can see on the IPCC website how to do that. There's a formal process that you need to go through.
And I've seen
tell you what it means.
Two questions in 2 different places, so I think we should address it about a template for the CV. There is no template for the CV. You should modify it and reduce it as you see fit based on the role in which you are applying for, but the restriction is the file size and the length. But there is not a template, so condense with the information that you think is relevant.
Yes, and then I saw a question from Nancy about what's the observer status list, and I just dropped it in the chat, so you can look and see all the organizations that have observer status, and hopefully, as we said, we'll see more academic institutions applying to be part of the IPCC in this role. So we're at 3 o'clock. That was the time that we had allotted for this webinar. We really are grateful for everyone who's been part of this. It's really been gratifying to see the interest. It shows us that there was a need for this alliance, and we're really grateful for everybody's interest in being part of this process, and especially grateful again to AGU for hosting us. They've really done the hard work to set up this portal and create this possibility for us to open this nomination up to as many people as possible. So thank you again. If you have questions, you can contact either myself or Rasmila at AGU. We've got contact information on the AGU portal site. And so you're able to, there's a little box that says contact us. Reach out if you have additional questions. We're happy to try to answer them. And I think we will close it out then. So thanks to all of the panelists for being part of this. Thanks to Alliance members who are in the background answering questions. And we hope to see all of your names being put forward in self-nominations before April 4th. Great. Thanks so much, everybody.